Welcome to Spitfire Presents, a new series we're going to do with the world's greatest film, television, video game, composers, artists, musicians. Couldn't be more excited to welcome one of Hollywood's and the world's greatest and most versatile composers. May I say that, Harry Gregson-Williams? You are one of the greatest, most versatile, and fabulous composers, and one of my favorites.
You're too kind, Robert.
And
Good morning. How are you?
It's always tempting, Harry. I'm doing great, too. You know, I worked with a producer who you did, too, on some of our films, who used to ask me if we could get Harry Gregster-Wilson to do the film, and I always want to refer to you. But I'm going to call you HGW, and I'm going to brag about you for a minute because, Harry, your opus is kind of unbelievable. From Shrek to Chronicles of Narnia, The Martian, The Rock. How about The Rock? You worked with Ridley Scott and Tony Scott. You did all those cool Ben Affleck movies like The Town, and just such great stuff. And I know that right now, Gladiator II is making $1 billion around the world with your score, and it's been shortlisted by the Oscars. And I hope you have your speech ready and your tuxedo all set so that you can go in there. But I wanted to ask you some questions about Gladiator today and just talk in general and
go for it, man.
Find out. I mean, I read about it. I saw the film, and I wished that I could hear more score in the movie theater and had to go back and listen, and was kind of amazed at how deep the score is when I'm not hearing the sound effects of the Coliseum.
Well, man, that's what we encounter when doing what is essentially or partly an action movie.
Yeah.
And we have to choose our moments carefully and not battle with the sound effects. I didn't feel it was too much of a struggle on this movie. I could tell from the first cut that Ridley sent me that was certainly going to be a challenge, the action sequences, because yes, the first cut, which contained an elongated rhinoceros scene, for instance. The sound of that beast hadn't been done yet, but I was pretty sure that it was going to be low and mean, so I didn't need to be anywhere near that frequency. But the thing that was actually most difficult to work with until very late on was the sound of the crowd in the Coliseum, because again that hadn't been done. They'd obviously done loop groups and all the rest of it, but I didn't have that until quite late on. But what I guess a film editor had laid in there sounded like a Saturday afternoon at Manchester United. It was crowd baying, but it was very monotone, and it was in one pitch, and it wasn't reacting to what was going on in the Coliseum. But gradually, as time went on, as you very well know, we as composers, we work in tandem with the final editor of the film, the sound effects, the visual effects. So all these things come in when they come in, and one's got to start somewhere. You can't keep putting things off, saying, "Well, I can't work this scene because I don't have the final sound." But gradually, layers started being put in by the sound effects people, and really artfully, actually, and which actually helped tell the story immeasurably. The reaction of the crowd, whether it was a positive one or a negative one or whatever. So I was able to duck and dive around that. But yeah, the noisy bits were challenging. They always are, man. I mean, going back to let me see. Well, you mentioned The Rock earlier, Armageddon, which I did with Trev. Yeah, man. The sound effects.
How do you score a rocket ship taking off?
Right. So, well, actually, Trev did that extremely well. It was beautiful, his theme then, and yeah.
I think it makes me wonder. I read about the score and how much effort you put into recording authentic instruments. I mean,
Yeah.
I saw that you traveled to northern Spain to find some guy who made period instruments. I mean, does that come?
Right.
I listened on the Score album, and it's fabulous. Now I have to wonder, did I hear that underneath the crowd sounds?
Well, yeah, those particular sounds probably aren't playing there. You know, I chose my moments to use the colours where I felt necessary. I mean, you know, you'd be hard pushed to hear a viol da gamba quartet if I were trying to play that over, you know, over the naval battle in the Colosseum. But no, I'm playing that actually. Speaking of the viols, yeah, there are a couple of scenes that Ridley and I really wanted to be kind of cold and a bit frigid, and I'd written the cues which he liked, but they, you know, I was using at that point, obviously in my demos, I was using rather lush muted string sounds, and that's what I would have recorded at Abbey Road at the end of the process if I hadn't have figured out to put this viol quartet in front of those muted strings that I would record and have in Abbey Road. You know, they don't play with vibrato. They're kind of ancient instruments. Well, ancient. They're older.
Yeah.
And they're tricky to play. They're tricky. They've got a kind of nasal, very chilly sound. Using the arrangement that I had on strings and transcribing that for the viol quartet, and then put them in the middle of Abbey Road alone.
Ooh, that's a great.
These sort of sounds were you know, that's very very typical of the way that I went about the score.
I'm curious about the, you know, of course, you have to have super high quality samples to write those demos. And I wonder if it's tempting to stick with the samples as opposed to the players, because you have this blend of synthetic and acoustic instruments when you record. I've done that with you. Is there a time you have to decide, or is it just understood that you're not going to use the synthetic versions and you're going to go spend the time and money on the
as you
recording
know,
the players?
No, I don't work on films all the time that will afford me to go and replace everything that I'm writing. On this occasion, I was able to. So that was one of the great joys and gifts of doing a movie like this. It was very well supported by Paramount.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Department in that, yeah. But having said that, in the writing process, I tend to know what sound I'm after, and I wouldn't be using a muted string patch with the thought that the sample had in any way got anything going on that I wanted more than the live thing. You know, a lot of, for instance, high-pitched, high-string sounds, like harmonics, which are quite difficult to record effectively within the orchestra when they're all sitting there, only because that pitch, it travels, man. It's like a piccolo. You try getting less volume on a harmonic that's been played by a few violins in a room like Abbey Road. It's very difficult. So actually, that's quite a good point you make. Going into the recording, I separate sound. There are one or two sounds, orchestral sounds, that normally would be played in the room with the orchestra. And actually, if I perform it live, they're going to have to be.
I'm curious about those ancient instruments. You know, the guy I never had heard of this, of course, a Carnix. Do you record him? Do you sample that instrument and then play the melodies you want on it? Do you write something out for him to play on the Carnix, and he in his farmhouse in northern Spain plays a Harry Gregson-Williams cue that you then take to Abbey Road?
It actually was a combination of the two. His instruments aren't transportable. It's certainly not over to here to Los Angeles. And anyhow, I thought it was what a fun trip. Let's go to northern Spain. So, I took down.
Was the dude really in a farmhouse?
Yeah, beautiful, rural, very isolated place. And then in the back of behind was an old stone barn, which has been beautifully converted into, with a Pro Tools rig and a little mixing desk and a room where he had all his instruments. And far better for me to go down there and discover the instruments with him and what they might be able to do, than to do something over the internet with him.
Did you bring a team? Was it just you showed up with a digital recorder?
Me from from LA, but he had a recordist there, and actually a camera crew, I think. I wasn't party to that, but I took down in my back pocket a couple of drives with, I think, the Roman invasion at the beginning of the film, the big action sequence, which I had done fairly early on, but I certainly hadn't finished with it. It was kind of my first pass. I think I'd played it for Ridley. He'd been very positive about it. But I knew that I wanted to flavour this with some ancient instruments that I hadn't even dreamt of yet. And I took that cue down to him, which was quite long, actually much longer than how it exists today, because the film was longer. So it was an early edit of the film. And I had a couple of lines, or notes I would sing him. I had actually written some things out for him to play. Whether they worked on this instrument or that instrument, that was down to what we did that afternoon. I was there. And he had a couple of, the Carnicks, good luck writing music for that. I mean, it's a wondrous sound, but it makes... It's not going to be chromatic, put it that way.
What is a Carnix? Do you blow through it or play it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a huge tubed instrument with a beautiful kind of serpent's head on the front where the sound comes out. His is. He took me around the instruments. He had various shells with holes pushed in them. I guess you could call them conches, but they were a bit more developed than that. Quite a few brass instruments. An instrument that looked remarkably like it was the grandfather of the French horn. So it was brass, and it was whirlwind kind of look to it, but many more circles and a much thinner tubing. But again, he was able to. Key-wise, I didn't worry too much about what was going on there. If I sensed that this instrument, for instance, this war horn, I think he called it, if I discovered that it was going to be able to behave a bit like a French horn, so it would like perfect fourths and perfect fifths. We're on the fly, and so okay, when we get to that part, let's have a bit of that. I discovered that the only key that it would play in was not a key that I would want to be in. But I had him play it nonetheless. I deal with it back here. There was a lot of give and take.
I love that. And I love that I thought it was the other way around. Like you would sample it, you'd go to Abbey Road and record, and then you'd kind of play on a keyboard, the Carnick sample in the melodies you did, but you actually recorded there and then tweaked post. You said something to me randomly a few weeks ago. We had a conversation, and you said that when you went to the premiere at the Man Chinese, I think you said there were moments in the film that, and I believe everyone probably has this when they've worked on a movie, that you thought could have been different or better. I wondered, number one, do you think that at most premieres? Do you listen to your work?
I think when we had that conversation, someone had asked me, whether it was you or somebody else we were with, are you satisfied? But then my answer was no, I'm rarely satisfied with anything. When I sit and watch a finished film, whether it's at a premiere or later on a DVD or whatever it is, catch it on TV, I can't, that's just my nature is to be self-critical about something and think, I wonder why the music didn't come in 2 beats earlier. It felt like there was a pregnant pause there. It's not like a score like Gladiator gets just thrown against the wall and there's no care taken about it. I mean, that particular cue, if I'm sensing that the cue came in a bit late, well, you can bet your bottom dollar that I spent a lot of time before precisely finding the best place for it. But just in that moment, seeing, a finished result of a film that I'm doing, maybe I'm looking for things I could have done
that's
better.
interesting. I think listening to this, I wonder, I'm hearing how many people, first of all, no one else in that Chinese theater is thinking what you're thinking. Everybody's, This is the movie, this is the way it's supposed to be. We have experts working on it. That cue started exactly where they wanted it to start. And it's really interesting to hear your perception of that moment. But when I listen to what you're describing an unbelievable amount of work to make this score. And traveling to Spain, sampling ancient instruments. Do you ever reflect on the fact that not a lot of people will know or care how hard the composer worked to create this soundscape?
No, that doesn't occur to me at all, because the only person I really need to know that he knows, that I know, that he knows, is the director. He knows that. Ridley knows that about me. That's probably why his brother recommended me to him.
I didn't realize that. You got to Ridley through Tony.
Well, I can only imagine that was partly the reason.
What was the first Ridley film, and what
Kingdom of Heaven?
It was Kingdom of Heaven, which
right.
we did
so
together.
I had done Enemy of the State, Man on Fire, Spy Game, maybe one more movie before. So I had done a lot of work with Tony before I did Kingdom. But it's so strange looking back on how things work and how we sort of travel through our lives, and some things we really want and we don't get, some things we're not looking for and they find us. Having had such an amazing experience and relationship with Tony Scott, I feel very honoured to do the odd movie for Ridley, and I know that he has choice, and I've never felt entitled to do his movies. Certainly not this one. With knowing who did the first score. So if he calls me, and now that just says to me he trusts that I can do it, and he knows that I'll bust my gut to do it.
It's interesting you say knowing who did the first score. I read, is this accurate that Hans either listened in to a mix, or you put him on speaker or something, or put him on a session?
I did, man. I've got to dig it out on my someone. There was actually doubling back. I was in London for a week and recording the orchestral component and the choirs for the movie, and I happened to have dinner in midweek. I had dinner with Hans, who happened to be in London also. I think he was doing Blitz at the time.
You're up against him now on the short list. How fabulous!
I don't. It doesn't feel that way. I'm not. No, I don't feel rivalry between me and Hans.
Beautiful.
I know who the master, who the boss, and who the apprentice is here in this relationship. No, so we had dinner, and he said, what are you doing? I said, well, what do you think I'm doing? I'm doing Gladiator II, and I'm actually, you know what? The guy who leads my orchestra, who's not everybody's choice to be the leader, his name's Perry Montague Mason. He was my leader going back, 20 years or something like that, maybe 15 years. And before that, he was certainly in the first orchestra I had the pleasure of having play on my stuff way back in the 90s. But he was leading the seconds. But he became the leader of my orchestra. And I think his last day, before he retired, was going to be the next day that I was having dinner with Hans, and the next day was going to be Perry's final day. He was going to retire. And I told Hans that. We discovered that actually Perry's first gig at all for anybody as leader was Gladiator.
Oh,
the original Gladiator, all those years ago. So I said to Hans, listen, man, I've got a camera crew there tomorrow. They're going to be doing, the EPK stuff. So I don't know whether we mind or not. But what if you zoom in? And I tell you what, I'll record. Actually, I had already recorded this cue, but I said, mate, I'll play, and we can record the cue at the end of the movie where Lucius's theme becomes Maximus's theme, and you can hear your big old Germanic tune. But you got to zoom in, and he said, "Oh, I'm very busy, but I want to do it." So we arranged it, and as I halfway through the morning session, I had the full orchestra there, I don't know, 80 or 90 people. And, Hans's big old ugly face came up on the screen behind me, so the orchestra could see it. And we played down that cue, and he was omnipresent, you might say.
Oh, that's incredible.
He was really chuffed. He's happy.
Yeah, I bet he is. I mean, you hear the evolution of his theme. I think it's really fabulous the way you did that and integrated it in and developed it. It's huge storytelling. I mean, it's interesting. I'm thinking of huge storytelling. I'm thinking of that final scene with Paul Mescal and Denzel, and they're fighting. And I actually had the thought while I was watching it that Harry and Denzel have a funny screen and composer relationship. I don't know if Denzel even realizes how his work has been scored by you. I mean, Man on Fire is for both of you. You told me Man on Fire was your first electronic score. Did I get that right?
No. I think Phone Booth
was Phone Booth. Okay, because we did both together, and it's funny. And you also mentioned Kingdom of Heaven. I remember Ridley on Kingdom of Heaven when you finished a cue and you came into the control room at Abbey Road, and he just lifted his head and said, and you said, "I know." And it was like, wow, this is a very unspoken kind of relationship between a director and a composer that I don't know what you guys are both understanding about what I just heard that sounded great. But on Man on Fire, was it completely, you'll have to remind me, was it completely electronic?
No, not completely at all. But it was predominantly.
And this is in a if I may be so bold, a pre-Spitfire universe.
Oh, yeah.
And so your samples, before you had the luxury of the libraries, did you create a lot of the electronic sounds? Were they generated by synths?
Yeah, I think so. I was just taking a deep dive into it, having done Phone Booth, and really enjoyed myself on that movie, with no real right to, because I had no history of being your synth guy. I mean, I just spent a bit of time around Hans Zimmer, and you go into his room at 2 a.m, and he was likely to be underneath some synth trying to fix it, as opposed to tuning up a violin. So that rubbed off on me. I was like, man,
you realize the irony of that is that I think you're thought of as one of the masters of blending synth and orchestra, and everybody assumes you're a master at synth as well.
Well, I can tell you, I still am intrigued by it. I'm still learning. I'm still experimenting with that. I mean, on Gladiator, there's very, very little that is synthetic. There are a couple of sort of bass lines that had to be fortified with I don't know, some SE1 or something. But yeah, the synth was very far from my thoughts on this one. There's a huge vocal component on Gladiator.
I actually was wondering about that, because the vocals, I listened carefully. It's sometimes unclear whether it's a vocal or a sample or a blend, because there's a very interesting sonic quality to some of the vocals. And are they actual singers? Are they samples of singers?
Well, the phenomenon and the Empress Lisa Gerard.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, no one has this sort of spirituality down as well as she does, and it just seemed like a beautiful thing to ask her to reprise just for a minute or two within this film. And as soon as she'd agreed to do it, and I got really excited about it, Ridley said, "Well, I don't know where we want to put it," and he wasn't, by the way, referring to the end title song, "Now We Are Free." That wasn't my choice at all. That wasn't predetermined elsewhere. But just her contribution to the score. Once she'd agreed to it, I thought, okay, I'm going to put it right at the beginning. In fact, it's going to be so at the beginning. It's going to be over the logos. And I really wanted to find a way of giving people a warm and fuzzy feeling that there's a legacy here, and trying to join the dots that way. But it just comes and it goes within 35 seconds or something at the beginning of the movie, and then we're off into something completely new. But in London, this amazing soprano who I found for the first time on The Last Duel, and really, really loved her on that. Her name's Grace Davison. She's a leading soprano. She sings in a couple of spots. It's quite ambient. It's not nearly as featured as it was in The Last Duel, but really important to me. On top of that, some beautiful voices from Northern Africa. I love painting with these sort of colours. There was one particular vocal that I had in my head, that what I wanted to do with it, and actually which coincided with what Ridley had asked me to look for, which was a kind of Northern African plaintive voice for the Arashak character at the beginning of the movie. And actually, I reprise it during the movie to help remind the audience that this is kind of what Lucius has lost. This is what's driving him forward, is the loss of his wife at the beginning of the movie. So I searched for a voice. We searched high and low. A friend of mine, Adam Smalley, pointed me to it. He was in my studio listening to some music, encouraging me, as he's done over the years many, many, many times. He didn't work on this movie. Worked on the original. But and he said, there's a score from about 25 years ago that's got an a cappella voice in it, that you have a listen to it, see what you make. I found it on Spotify or whatever, and I listened to it, and I really liked the quality of it, liked it a lot, and it was like a 2.5 minute a cappella track. So I sent out kind of search parties looking for this vocalist, who's known as Gigi. But to no avail. We could not find her. Last seen, in San Francisco, or maybe she's on the West Coast, the East Coast rather. We really couldn't find her. So, being a little bit impatient, I realised that there were, within this 2.5 minute piece, if I snipped up some bits that I really wanted to put it into my system, I could actually manipulate it to work sonically and melodically with the music cue that I already had for Arashak. So that's what I did, and I thought, well, I better call someone about that. Someone's got to pay this lady and license the music. But before I do that, I might as well see if Ridley likes it, because if he doesn't like it, no point in going down that path. Yeah. So I sent it to him. He was in France at the time, and he got immediately back, love it, H, love it. So yes, my next call was to the music department in Paramount. So look, it's only about 8 or 10 seconds, but we need to license this thing.
Bless you for taking care of the artist. I appreciate it.
Oh, goodness gracious! Yeah, I mean, it would have been lovely to have her. Yeah. But to be honest, with my time constraints at that point, that happened quite late on in the process, and I still have music to write, and being left alone with this 2.5 minute a cappella track, it was a perfect little sandbox.
Oh, that's beautiful.
I'm afraid it possibly doesn't make any sense in Ethiopian anymore, because I might have switched the order of but it's just a little blip, and it just happens, and those sort of moments are the moments that I enjoy more than any other. Perhaps not more than any other, but I really love to put together kind of a tapestry of sound, and in the colours that can be afforded by, whether it's a cantelli or a santur, or an oud, or I try to stay away from the duduk as much as possible. I think I utilised it in one piece. It's so beautiful. I love it, and there's no particular reason to stay away from it, other than it's quite well used. These days, and it's kind of almost a caricature of itself, which is a hell of a shame. Beautiful instrument. Yeah. kind of been down that path on a movie called Prince of Persia years ago, and a bit on Kingdom of Heaven. But there were weird and wonderful instruments all over the place to be able to tap into. And I tend to want to do that as I'm writing the demos, because that's kind of how I'm imagining the music, as opposed to leaving it all to the end of the process, maybe having a couple of extra days at Abbey Road to record these featured vocalists and instrumentalists. But by then, I feel I really want the director to feel exactly what I'm doing.
I think there are a number of young composers listening who would love to know. I mean, you're describing it in pieces here, but I mean, your range is enormous. I mean, you go from Shrek to Gladiator II, kind of, with a little Penguins documentary in there, and Narnia, and really enormous. But it all comes down to this kind of central approach you have, which is incredibly creative. But I think for a young composer, they would wonder, is there any way that you use to start a project? Is there something in all that unites a huge variety of music, but is there a ritual or a routine, or is there what's a day in the life of Harry when he is?
Well, mainly I start, as you see, I've got a nice piano behind me. The after 2 or 3 years of being in America with Hans as his assistant, I could afford to buy a piano. I certainly couldn't when I arrived. And that's the piano. I still have it. And it fits nicely in my studio here. And I usually start there, man, because I'm on terra firma there, not because I'm half the quarter of the pianist that a gentleman like Chris Bowers is. This guy's like a monster piano player. Or, many people, composers and otherwise, with pianists, great pianists everywhere. I'm not one of them, but man, I've been playing since I was 4 or something, and I can play, and I like to play, I enjoy to play. So I generally will start over at my piano with a sketch pad, some manuscript, and a pencil.
And is it you've read a script and you have a general idea? Do you close your eyes and start noodling melodies and thinking this sounds like what a man on fire would sound like? I mean, is it?
Yeah.
Do you come with an idea to the piano, or do you just let your fingers?
No, I will try and resist the temptation to move over to this side of the room, which is where, Cubase, where I start programming and arranging music. I find that if I go there too quickly, which is what the temptation is, because that's where all the joy of all the sounds exist, then I may be shortchanging the creative process. My opening salvo should not be restrained or restricted by the picture at this point. So I think it has to sort of speak for itself a little bit to me, just privately to me. And if I possibly can, at that stage, I'll have a director come in here, and I probably would have chosen a couple of moments in the film to take what I'm going to play him on the piano, maybe a main theme or whatever it is I'm going to play him, but I'd have sequenced up, arranged, orchestrated a couple of moments, not vast amounts, but so to bring someone into our world and maybe sit him down and play him the sort of idea, this is what I'm thinking. So it's just piano at that stage. There's no piano in Gladiator II. Actually, there might be a little bit somewhere, but very little. But that's besides the point. It's a feeling. And also it's a good chance to read body language and get a reaction. And then I'd move over to saying, look, this is how it could work for this character in a scene like this. Not this is what you're getting for this scene. Not at all a fait accompli at that point. More like, so this is how it would evolve into your film. And a scene like this, it could play kind of like this. And I like that idea because it gives the director an opportunity to feel like he's not being cornered, to feel like he's a part of the process. I think, and I'm sure I've been guilty of this previously, probably on a few occasions, where the temptation is to get your man or your lady into the room, sit them down and hit them with your music and expect them to love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. Don't give me any notes. No, but that's not really the real world. So, I mean, it might happen a few times occasionally, but I think to ease in gently, not so that there's a gentle fall, but just to, so this is, I've been sitting at the piano and this is what I'm feeling. But in addition to that, have a listen to how that might sound with some strings and a clarinet or whatever it is you're doing. And I feel that a director can push back in a more civil and decent environment by saying, I'm not really feeling it here, as opposed to sending a bunch of music over to a director and then probably getting a bunch of notes back. But can we all work like that all the time? No, because it's definitely wasn't COVID but COVID didn't help. But this kind of composing remotely, it's taken on quite a thing. And we actually don't have to be in the same room as the filmmakers, sadly.
But there's nothing better than the body language. The best moments have been a director saying to the composer, wait, go back, and then you have this interaction. What was that bit? And then,
absolutely. Back in the day, thinking about it, I mean, that's kind of how I learned the ropes with Hansen. He, I would be in the back of the room. It would be his movie. I'm perhaps helping with, but it would always be about the meeting that week. The meeting, as the director, composer, review, and the DreamWorks movies that I was so lucky to do, particularly at the beginning, so Sinbad and Shrek and Chicken Run Ants, these movies, Jeffrey Katzenberg came to my studio. I mean, he came to my room at Hans's studio, and Hans would come into the meetings and he'd offer up any pearls of wisdom himself. And there was a change, I don't know when it happened, where perhaps it was just the facility of the internet. It wasn't the invention of the internet, because that happened before, but like, it really is possible to send good quality demos over the internet and safely. So you might say, well, why not do it? Sometimes it's unavoidable. I mean, Ridley spent some of the months that I was on this movie. I was probably on the movie 16 months or something like that. Certainly a year. He spent some of that in post-production in France. And, I made a visit. I went over to see him. Nothing better. I have done a few times. But some of the music I had to send, and one just has to get used to it. But if one can engineer it so that you can be in the same room, certainly for the first bit, before you really set sail on a direction. Oh, it's critical, I think. Beneficial. Tell me, I think as we get near a wrap, as they say in show business, I was asked to ask you, when I said I'm going to have a conversation with Harry, what's a piece of advice that another composer, musician, director gave you that you felt was really valuable, that you would want to share with composers today? I kind of liked that question. I was asked to ask you, and I thought it's a good one. I have quite a small but perfectly formed home studio now. Back in the day when I moved from Hans's studio to my own place in Venice, it was a vast building with a vast staircase, and I had all my posters up there, and I used to love it. Every time I did a movie, we'd put a new poster up, and it just felt good and it was fun. Here I only have the space for a couple of posters, but one of them is Spy Game. I like the way the poster looks, but I also like what Tony wrote on it. He said, everyone takes a bit of us. And he actually clarified that when he gave it to me, the poster. Because I think I was in his office. We were probably doing the next film by then, but he gave me a poster. There you go, and I sort of unraveled it, and there was that message, and he saw me read it. He said, it's important to know that although everyone we do takes a bit of us, we can't let it take too much of us. Which I suppose, knowing his fate, was perhaps a little ironic. But
so you give everything.
I try and bear that in mind. I mean, the thing is, that's not devaluing the effort and the soul that we have to put into these things. It's actually the reverse of that. It's saying because everyone takes a bit of us to do, it should do, it ought to. But because of that, you can't let it take all of you. I don't know whether that makes any sense.
That's just lovely. Tell us, is there anything special coming up that we should look for, that you can
It's
share?
a really special film. I'm just starting. But I don't know. Someone said to me before I came on, don't mention it because it hasn't been announced. Well, announced? I'm a film composer. I'm not a director. I'm not Brad Pitt, for God's sake. Who cares? But talk to me again in a couple of weeks. It's just, and you're going to love it, man. You're going to love it.
You know me so well.
You are. Everybody's going to be like, yes. Not that I'm doing it, but that film is being made.
I'm excited. I really love our conversations. I always have for 30 years or 50 years or whatever it is. And I also, I gotta say that being in that room with you, whether it's usually I see you in room 1 at Abbey Road. You've turned the orchestra sideways, which I always think, that's really Harry's vibe, to kind of not go the way I usually am used to it with the conductor's back to me. But Harry's over on the left wall as you're looking out the window, looking at the orchestra sideways, and you're showing the orchestra. I must say, you do something that I really love. You show the orchestra the scene, and you talk about the emotional content, and you warm them up with, this one, she's really sad here, but the audience doesn't know why. You'll give them something. I'll think, that's so smart, because they're now going to play with a little information, a little emotional content. So, Harry Gregson-Williams, which I will call you when I can't actually remember why he could never remember Harry Gregson-Williams, but you're a fabulous composer, a wonderful human being. I really appreciate your time. I can't wait to find out what that next picture is. And I also recommend to all of our listeners, if you have an opportunity, dial up the Gladiator II score album, because it's a revelation of how hard Harry worked to make these cues beautiful. Fabulous stuff. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you, Harry. God bless.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate you. Thanks a lot, Robert.
See you soon. Hey, thanks everybody for joining us for this episode of Spitfire Presents. We really love talking to these composers, as you can tell. I mean, I'm privileged to have a conversation with Harry Gregson-Williams. He's one of the great composers of this generation, actually of any generation, a real master of film scoring. Carol, I'm glad you are helping us with all of this. Did you feel that you had your questions answered by Harry?
Yes, they were all answered. Thank you so much for asking them. And I was trying to think what my favorite question was. And it might have, one of them might be the premiere question. And Harry said that after a premiere, he's rarely satisfied with his own work. And I think it's a great reminder for myself, at least, or to anyone else listening, that there's always room to grow.
Yeah, I think that's probably the seed of Harry's greatness, is that, or any artist, when you think, John Lennon said, I never finish a record. At one point, I just walk away. And I kind of love that the great artist is always looking, but
to grow our craft, pun intended.
Thank you very much. Spelled with a K. Spitfire presents a great, great opportunity to share with you. Thank you to Spitfire Audio. And we're going to close out. Carol has a special treat for us because she's not only the coordinator of our show, as you will hear, she has a fairly magnificent ability at the piano.
Thanks, Robert. You're too kind. Yeah, I'm very excited to be playing a piano medley of some of my favorite Harry Gregson-Williams' themes using Spitfire audio sounds. So I hope you guys enjoy, and thanks for tuning in. We hope to see you on the next one.